In this video, we're going to be covering the top 5 ways to make tofu without pressing. Let's jump in. So in general, there are 4 main types of tofu. You have silken tofu, firm tofu, extra firm, and then super firm. So the first one is silken tofu, and it's pretty soft and delicate, but it works really well for sauces and smoothies. I don't generally use firm tofu, so we're not going to be using it today, but it's one step up from silken tofu in order of firmness. So up next we have extra firm tofu. This is my personal favorite tofu, and it just works really well in stir fries, in scrambles. I love chopping it up and just baking it, so it's really versatile and I love using it. And lastly, we have super firm tofu. If you don't like your tofu being spongy or soft, this is a really great option. You really don't have to press the water out ever because it already has a very low water content. While we're on the topic of pressing tofu, I do not personally press my tofu, and all of these recipes do not require pressing. I personally find that it takes a little bit too much time to press your tofu, and I know it's easy, but I just rather not include that step in my recipes. But with that being said, pressing can reduce the cook time of your tofu, and it can also make it a little bit more flavorful and reduce some of the water content. So it's definitely something that you can do if you prefer. So last thing that I want to mention before we dive into the recipes are a few different tofu cutting techniques. So the first technique is cutting the tofu into slabs. I find this to be easiest if you first cut it directly in the middle and then cut both of the sides in half and then cut them in half again. That's generally a really good thickness for cooking. So the next technique is cutting the tofu into cubes. To accomplish this, first turn the tofu block onto its side and cut it in half. Then lay it down, cut directly in the center, and then cut both of the halves in the center as well. Then rotate your tofu block by 90 degrees and repeat the same cutting technique. The final cutting technique, which has become my personal favorite, is very similar to a butterfly cut. To accomplish this, first cut your tofu into cubes and then cut crosses into each of the cubes that go down about halfway through the cube. So the thing that I really love about the butterfly cut is that it absorbs sauces and seasonings better, and it also cooks a little bit more thoroughly. So the first way to make tofu is my personal favorite, air frying. So air frying tofu is perhaps the easiest way to make crispy tofu without adding oil. We're going to use the butterfly cut tofu in the air fryer. After you've cut the tofu, lay all the cubes down with the butterfly cut pointing up. Then pour a sauce or marinade of your choice over the top. I've really been loving this Steakhouse peppercorn marinade from Wegmans. I recommend that you gently massage your marinade or sauce into the tofu. You're welcome to marinate the tofu overnight, but you really don't need to. Next, put your tofu in the air fryer for 15 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 175 degrees Celsius. After 15 minutes, check on your tofu, and depending on your air fryer, you might need to cook it for a little bit longer. Once it's done, take it out and it's ready to eat. So the next way to make tofu is to scramble it. I like to start my tofu scrambles with some diced onions and red bell pepper, but you can add whatever veggies you want. After you've sauteed the veggies, add some extra firm tofu and mash it up. You can just use a cooking utensil, but honestly, the easiest way to mash it is by just using your hands. For the tofu scramble, you can use whatever seasonings you want. I like using salt, pepper, smoked paprika, turmeric, and garlic powder. After you mash it up and add your spices, cook the tofu scramble for another 5 to 10 minutes. So the next method is baking. This is perhaps the easiest way to prepare a lot of tofu at once, so this is great for meal prep. So to bake the tofu, start by cutting a tofu block into slabs. Then lay down the slabs and apply a seasoning of your choice. I like using the McCormick Perfect Pinch seasonings. Be sure to get an even coat of seasoning across all the tofu, and then you can massage it into the tofu a little bit to ensure that it sticks. Preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 200 degrees Celsius. Next, we're going to apply seasoning to our baking sheets. This will add extra flavor and ensure that the tofu doesn't stick to the pan. Next, lay down your tofu on the baking sheets. Once the oven reaches temperature, place your tofu in the oven and set a timer for 20 minutes. So this was my first time using this oven for baking. I usually just use that for air frying. And since these got a little crispy, you might need to adjust the cooking time depending on what oven you're using. So generally I flip these tofu slabs and cook them for another 10 to 15 minutes. But since these got extra crispy, what I'm gonna do is flip them and just cook them for a few extra minutes. Once you've flipped the tofu and baked it for a little bit longer, take it out of the oven and it's ready to eat. Next, we're gonna be blending tofu. I know it might sound a little weird, but adding silken tofu to sauces and smoothies is a great way to add extra protein. It also helps to add a creamy consistency. Okay, so we're gonna be making a creamy tofu smoothie with fruits. And for this smoothie, we're gonna be using a 16-ounce package of silken tofu. So this recipe is super simple. All you need to do is blend up 1 package of silken tofu, 4 cups of frozen fruit. I love using mango and pineapple, 2 fresh bananas, and half a cup of water. Once you have all the ingredients in the container, simply blend it up. I love smoothies, so I like to make a larger portion, but you can totally cut this recipe in half. So the last method that I'm gonna show you is making vegan tofu jerky. I absolutely love this recipe. It's really easy and super delicious. So we're gonna be using the super firm tofu for this recipe. And the first step that you wanna do is cut the tofu into very thin slices, between about 1/4 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch, but shooting for 1/8 of an inch. If you make these slabs too thick, then they're gonna take forever to bake, so that's why we wanna make them about 1/8 of an inch. Next, preheat your oven to 225 degrees Fahrenheit or about 105 degrees Celsius. We're gonna be cooking the tofu at a low temperature for a long period of time to dehydrate it and create that jerky consistency. So for our sauce, we're gonna be using a teriyaki marinade. Be sure to coat both sides of the tofu slabs thoroughly and then place them on a lined baking sheet with aluminum foil. Once you have all of your tofu slabs on the baking sheet, go ahead and put that in the oven. If you use super firm tofu like I did, the baking time should take about 2 hours. But if you used firm or extra firm tofu, the baking time will take longer. So be sure to check on it after 2 hours, and if it's not the right consistency, flip the tofu over and bake it as long as needed. So that's it. Those are my top 5 ways to make tofu without pressing. Tofu is one of my favorite foods to be incorporating into different meals. It's absolutely packed with plant protein and it's also super nutritious. So thank you so much for watching this video and I'll see you in the next one.